The world today is arbitrarily ruled by Jews and Christians. The Americans, the British, and others. And behind them, the fingers of international Jewry with their wealth and their women and their media.
At the same time, Pakistan was funneling more and more of the CIA's money to the most radical Afghan Muslims. In the end, they would contribute to the expansion of jihad around the world.
We sought to maintain a balance and never allow it to get too far in favor of the fundamentalists. We had really very few illusions. That's not to say that we could have predicted that some of these mujahideen might have turned against the U.S. or the West later on. But as I say, our focus was on hitting and hurting as much as possible the Soviet forces in Afghanistan. I don't think we have really anything to be apologetic about. These were the fighting assets, and we had to aid them. What came later, came later.
The Mujahideen had succeeded in driving out a superpower. It showed men like Abdullah Azzam that they could now defeat any enemy of Allah, no matter how powerful.
Oh brothers, after Afghanistan, nothing in the world is impossible for us anymore. There are no superpowers or mini powers. What matters is the willpower that springs from our religious belief.
Jihad battlefronts expanded throughout the Middle East. Islamic holy warriors began launching terror attacks against Israel, Egypt, and Algeria.
The terrorists portrayed themselves as freedom fighters, and many in the West fell for this. They thought, well, they're just freedom fighters. We're for freedom, and we're for fighting for freedom, and why not just accept them for what they are, whereas they were in fact terrorists. So it's not a new problem that terrorists will hide behind definitions.
Paul Bremer was ambassador-at-large for counterterrorism for the State Department in the 1980s.
I always felt when I was involved in the counterterrorism efforts that it was important to make a distinction. We were not anti-Islamic. The vast majority of Islamic people, the vast majority of Arab people are peace-loving, peacekeeping people like most Americans. Terrorists in every society are a very small minority of corrupt, criminal, violent people, many with a political agenda, who should be singled out for specific attention. But it should never be that we say in anything that gives the impression that we think the fight against terrorism is a fight against Islam or a fight against the Arabs.
Ironically, anti-Western militants soon found that the United States was the best place to raise funds, disseminate propaganda, and build up their political organizations.
Coming to the United States gives them a platform that they can use for the rest of the world. They can produce their films, their videos, their publications, they can collect money, and they can use it to support their movement. And
Oliver Buck Revelle was one of the FBI's top counterterrorism agents.
Many acts of terrorism have been carried out in the name of religion, so certainly this extremist element of Islam is not unique. What is unique is the international nature, the connection all the way from North America, Europe, the Middle East, Pakistan, Afghanistan, over into Southeast Asia. It is much more global than any type of terrorist network that we've had to deal with in the past.
From the Al-Kifaq Refugee Center in Brooklyn, Abdullah Azzam and others would go around the country raising money and preaching holy war.
There is no turning back from the stone to the pistol, to the Uzi, to the cannon, to the RPG, and then you can expect Allah's ultimate victory.
The Al-Kifaq Refugee Center set up an elaborate support and recruiting network coast to coast, with branches in more than 38 American cities. These centers became clearinghouses and recruiting offices to support jihad around the world. It was Azzam's top aide, a Palestinian sheikh named Tamim al-Adnani, who did some of the most vigorous fundraising. He is seen here appealing for funds in Lawrence, Kansas in 1988.
So one of our purposes is to collect money for mujahideen, donations, as much as we can. And alhamdulillah, today, as our brothers noticed, we have got from Colombia the greatest sum so far. Before Colombia, we had 9,500 from a place called Corvallis, town called Corvallis in Oregon, very near to Portland. Now, today, we have got much more. We have got $15,256 plus about 4,500 gold. So about $20,000 from the town of Colombia. And this is the peak now.
But it wasn't just money he was interested in. Adnani was actively recruiting fighters to take part in the Jihad.
The only politics we understand is taq, taq, taq. This is the best politics. Shooting, we sell our, as Sayyaf said, نحن نحل قضيتنا في الخنادق لا في الفنادق. We solve our problems in the trenches, not in the hotels. Our problems are solved in the trenches, fighting, not in the hotels, round the tables.
But Adnani was not just referring to the trenches in Afghanistan. His vision of jihad was a worldwide liberation movement waged in the name of Allah. Listen to him here as he explains to his followers the scope of the holy war.
The best thing is continue jihad, nothing but jihad. Even after liberation of Afghanistan, wallahi, the leaders have agreed in front of me to continue jihad fi sabilillah, even after liberation of Afghanistan, even after the Islamic government. They will not stop. They will go up to the Muslim countries of Russia, Islamic republics. They will go down to Palestine, to Al-Quds. They all promised Allah to liberate Palestine. Anybody stops in their way, oh my God, I will sit over him myself. Smash him. Any ruler, he will not let us go, we'll go by force. Jihad, you know what is jihad? Allahu Akbar. And then imagine the Afghanis who gave very hard time to Russia, the Soviets. What will they do with the Israelis? They will eat them. Afghanis are very crazy people. They are very brave. I have never seen like this. Wallahi, 100, all of them, Allahu Akbar, and they run. Machine gun, bombs, nothing stop them, wallahi. Nothing. When they want to die shahada, they want shahada. Allahu Akbar, and they come.
But the militants' rage was not limited to their enemies in the Middle East. Increasingly, the Islamic holy warriors focused their anger on the West, especially America. Abdullah Azzam was the keynote speaker at what was called the First Conference of Jihad, held not in the Middle East, but in Brooklyn, New York. Azzam instructed his audience to wage jihad wherever they were, even in America.
The jihad, the fighting, is obligatory on you wherever you can perform it. And just as when you are in America you must fast unless you are ill or on a voyage, so too must you wage jihad. The word jihad means fighting only, fighting with the sword.
In 1989, Azzam was assassinated in Pakistan by unknown assailants. His death made him a martyr to radical Muslims around the world. Back in America, the calls for jihad grew even louder from leaders like Azzam's cousin Fayez, speaking in Atlanta in 1990.
Allah's religion, be He praised, must offer scouts, must offer martyrs. Blood must flow. There must be widows. There must be orphans. Hands and limbs must be cut, and the limbs and blood must be spread everywhere in order that Allah's religion stand on its feet.
Groups of militants began weapons training on American soil. Islamic radicals, including several suspects in the World Trade Center bombing, attended this meeting in Brooklyn, where Sheikh Tamim al-Adnani ordered them to prepare for the holy war.
Brothers, I encourage you to attend the shooting practice. There is nothing greater than the power of the shot. Learn to shoot. The skill of shooting is so important. He who has begun learning how to shoot and did not go through with the training is not one of us. And from here we move on to the true shooting against the enemies of Allah, God willing.
followers answered the call. Radicals conducted military exercises at shooting ranges and training camps in at least 9 U.S. locations, including this one in Connecticut. Groups of Islamic militants fired semi-automatic weapons and trained with explosives. According to FBI intelligence reports, groups would come every weekend and shoot 1,000 rounds a day into silhouette-shaped targets. One of the leaders was an Egyptian immigrant named Said Nosair. In November 1990, Nosair was arrested for the murder of militant Rabbi Meir Kahane.
Watch the walls.
Thank you. It hurts.
Nosair was shot while fleeing the murder scene. He was brought to the same emergency room as Kahane. Nosair survived his wound and was later sent to Attica prison. Rabbi Kahane died on this table. Alvin Schlesinger was the judge at the trial.
I had never in my life, I must tell you, ever seen such raw, red hatred that existed between any groups or any persons. I mean, it was the kind of hatred that went far beyond doctrine, far beyond the cause. It was raw, red, and violent hatred.
We have murder in the second degree, second charge of attempted murder, first degree, third charge is assault, second degree, fourth charge is criminal possession of a weapon.
Even though Nosair had ties to an international radical network, police never investigated the possibility of a larger conspiracy.
There was no indication at all of any conspiracy of a nature that has been spoken of. The facts indicate at this point it was a lone gunman who committed a homicide.
Nosair was ultimately convicted of weapons charges, but unexpectedly, the jury acquitted him of the Kahane murder. His supporters were elated.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
It was irrational almost in terms of the evidence that I saw at that trial. It made no sense, common or otherwise, to reach that verdict, particularly with the other verdicts that were reached. So I think it was outrageous.
Nosair was brought to this holding cell in Lower Manhattan after his arrest. By then, detectives had searched his apartment and found 47 boxes full of personal possessions and papers. But investigators dismissed those papers as irrelevant religious materials. It was only after the bombing of the World Trade Center that law enforcement re-examined those papers and realized they had overlooked one of the largest collections of terrorist materials ever found in the United States. The papers included plans to blow up American skyscrapers. The documents would reveal that Nosair was at the heart of a worldwide terrorist network headquartered right here in the United States.
Unfortunately, we had that information. It was there, and we didn't see it.
Michael Cherkasky was the chief of investigations for the Manhattan District Attorney at the time of the bombing.
And looking back at it, there was an enormous amounts of significant material in those boxes. Whether they were the precise plans, no, I don't think so, but were there very strong indications that this man and a group of compatriots were involved in terrorist activities which could ultimately lead to a disaster like the World Trade Center? The answer is yes.
The boxes included formulas for bomb making, detailed instructions on attacking aircraft, assassination targets, and even classified U.S. military documents. Yet by far, the most important document was a hand-sized spiral notebook full of neatly written Arabic text in which Nosair spells out his plans for the destruction of the enemies of Allah.
We have to thoroughly demoralize the enemies of God by means of destroying and blowing up the towers that constitute the pillars of their civilization, such as the tourist attractions they are so proud of and the high buildings they are so proud of.
Only when we started looking at that material and we started finding things in seeing things clearly for the first time, that we became agitated because, honestly, because we hadn't seen it before, and excited because, in fact, we now thought we had more of a clue about tracing the history of this group and more of an idea about what had actually happened here. That, in fact, it was a long-term conspiracy that had been hatched by Sheikh Rahman.
Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, leader of a militant Egyptian movement, came to the United States in 1990. He would soon assert control over the Jihad movement in the U.S. The killing of Kahana was the first act of terrorism planned and carried out by Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman's foot soldiers.
Omar Abdul Rahman was accused in Egypt of enticing people to kill Sadat. He got away with it. He came here. I heard him myself talking about jihad, and I heard him and I understand how he could convince people in the way of jihad, in the wrong meaning of the word jihad.
The only thing is that we don't have any picture for him.
Saif Ashmawi publishes an Arabic newspaper called The Voice of Peace. Despite threats to his life, he has been a vocal critic of Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman.
Islam is a very new baby in United States. It just been introduced to the American in the past 10 years. They heard of it, but they don't know anything about it. In the past 10 years, they start to listen to it. And all the image they had at that time was Imam Khomeini. Now they have worse than Imam Khomeini after the World Trade Center.
Sheikh Abdul Rahman actively recruited followers across the country.
The obligation of Allah is upon us to wage jihad for the sake of Allah. It is one of the obligations which we must undoubtedly fulfill. And we conquer the lands of the infidels, and we spread Islam by calling the infidels to Allah. And if they stand in our way, then we wage jihad for the sake of Allah.
The jihad movement in the United States attracted a group of followers willing to put words into action. Like Mahmoud and Mohammed Abu Halima, identified here for the first time at this jihad rally in Brooklyn in 1989 and charged 4 years later as conspirators in the World Trade Center bombing. And Siddig Ali, a Sudanese radical accused of being an architect of Sheikh Abdul Rahman's campaign of terror. Here, just months before the World Trade Center bombing, he is recruiting followers in New Jersey.
When the sword is to be absolutely used and implemented, this is as a principle.
Jihad is something that has to be implemented. It's not a thing that we speak of, it's a thing that we do.
And Clement Rodney Hamptonell, an American who was wounded in Afghanistan fighting the jihad. Hamptonell was a follower of Sheikh Abdul Rahman and allegedly helped plan the killing of Rabbi Meir Kahana. He would later be charged in the World Trade Center conspiracy.
Jihad, Allahu Akbar, Jihad, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
From his prison cell, Nosser continued to organize the campaign of terror. Prison logs show that he met with several of the conspirators to help plan the World Trade Center bombing.
He was a soldier when he shot Kahani, and in some ways his status was elevated to be a soldier, a trainer, an example, a martyr for the movement, who was allegedly continually demanding that the movement move forward, that they take more strident action, that he was sitting in jail for what he had done, and that others had to pick up the mantle.
But the plot did not shift into high gear until the arrival of two men in the United States 5 months before the bombing. One was Ahmed Hajjaj. He was arrested at Kennedy Airport for carrying false passports. Police found in his possession a vast array of bomb-making manuals and videotapes, including this one, produced by a group called the International Islamic Resistance. Hajjaj's partner, Ramzi Youssef, managed to enter the country. He immediately went to a New Jersey safe house where he began building the bomb. He spoke regularly to Hajjaj in prison. Yusuf escaped hours after the blast. His whereabouts today are unknown. In the summer of 1993, Sheikh Abdul Rahman and 14 followers were indicted for the bombing of the World Trade Center. They were also accused of conspiring to blow up the Lincoln and Holland tunnels and the United Nations building and planning the assassination of prominent Americans. In April 1994, in the first of a series of trials, 4 followers of Sheikh Rahman's, Mohammed Salama, Mahmoud Abu Halima, Niyal Ayad, and Ahmed Hajjaj, were sentenced to 240 years each. But Sheikh Abdul Rahman's followers are not alone.